Welcome, Beckie Shuttleworth, to the Legacy Life podcast and this series of Awakening Legacy. I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
It's great to have you on. And I am loving speaking to the authors in the Awakening Legacy book. So Beckie is one of the 12 authors who help you unleash your purpose through her story in the Awakening Legacy book. So yeah, big welcome to you, Beckie. Really great to have you here. So my first question to you, I'm just looking at my questions. I'm going to start off with the question that I think I've been asking everybody first, which is, how would you sum up in a sentence your chapter?
Okay, so my chapter is called Reconnecting and the Invitation to Shine Brightly. And I think that sentence, the invitation to shine, accepting the invitation to shine brightly, is really what my chapter is all about.
Brilliant. So that's great. I love that your title is also sums up your chapter. I love that. So accepting the invitation to shine brightly. So what does it mean? What does it mean to shine brightly?
To shine brightly. So for me, the work that I do with children, the way I sum it up with children is to inspire children to live into the most truthful and joyful expression of themselves. And that's what I believe life is all about for all of us. So for me, shining brightly is being authentic and joyful in our being.
Oh, the truest expression of yourself. I love that. Love it, love it, love it. So, obviously in these conversations, I don't want to give away the whole of your chapter because we obviously want people to come and read it and get the juice out of it. But what was it that attracted you to this project? Like, why are you in the book?
So many reasons. It just all kind of fell into place at exactly the perfect time for me. I've always loved reading. I'm a big reader, as you can see from the bookshelves behind me if you're watching the video. I probably spend more money on books than anything else at this stage in life. So I love reading. I still find, as much as I'm online, I still find that reading and books are my first port of call for new knowledge, and I love books, and also previously at different stages of my life where writing has been required of me, I've loved the process of crafting a piece of writing. So whether that's been kind of essays at university, longer things like dissertations, those sorts of things, I really love that creative process of writing, and I haven't done much of it for quite some time, except for like small pieces for like my business online and things like that. And at the exact same time that we first started talking about this project, I was working with a trauma specialist, looking at some of the things that have happened in my life and how they've impacted me. And so I've really been on this journey of awakening my legacy for some time. And so the idea of writing the book with this theme just seemed perfect for me.
That's so amazing, because I mean, when we, and I've talked about this with other authors as well in the book, because when we started this project, we knew it was about legacy, but we didn't have that title yet. And so it's so interesting, this sense of this awakening process for you as the author, but also for the reader as well, this kind of sense of awakening that's happened through this journey of writing. And I wonder
Yeah,
how common
absolutely.
that is with writers.
I would suggest that probably quite a lot of I would think that probably quite a lot of writers go through this process because it's a cathartic process, isn't it? Writing and creating a piece, and and most creative people who write songs, people who write poetry, like a lot of people use that form of creativity to work through their own thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and all of those sorts of things. So I think, yeah, I would say, yeah, it probably happens to lots of writers, and I know that I definitely went through a huge process in the actual process of writing.
Ooh, I've just thought of a great question, which is, what was your biggest awakening through the process of writing this book?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Mm.
What was my biggest awakening? I think actually I wasn't quite as aware of how much my own experiences impacted the work that I do today.
Mm.
I think I've become more aware of that. So while I've always felt really passionate about the work I do and really aligned with the work I do, I don't think I was quite as clear on what elements of my earlier life had had influenced the type of work that I do. And now that all seems very, very like crystal clear to me how I got from A to B.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting, that process of reflecting, because when you start to engage with the topic of legacy, you naturally look at, well, what has been passed on to me, like what ways of being, what social norms, what familial norms within our family have been passed on. What do I want to keep? What do I want to continue? What do I want to pass on? Comes
And
up.
actually that was a huge element for me, was thinking, because I kind of knew some of what I wanted to say, and I knew that I wanted to obviously talk about where I am now and what processes and what practices have helped me into this place where I am now from where I was. But I also wasn't quite sure where I wanted to start the story.
Yeah.
And so there's elements that I haven't included in the chapter that were still hugely important for me in the process. And I think, we had a limited space and I had to decide what were the most important things, but that doesn't mean that other aspects of the process that I went through weren't really important as well.
Ooh, and that has just formed my next question, because it's just made me think, because I can really relate to that through writing this book.
Yeah.
When you get to write a chapter in a book, there were whole sections, like I did whole pieces that aren't in this chapter, that I went, actually that gets to stay to the side and is not going to make the final cut, but is a whole piece in itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think out of doing this is almost like you get a whole book out of doing it in ideas, right?
Yeah, that maybe that's the next thing. We'll see.
Maybe that is. So my next question is, do you want to share any of those elements that you didn't get to include but that you would like to share? Because this is an opportunity to shine a light on one of those elements you didn't actually get to share in the book, but you have this opportunity right now to go, ooh, this piece is something that I'd love to speak to in this conversation, and share with people, because you have the space right now, you have this platform, and we're all listening to you and interested in what you've got to say.
So one of the elements that I didn't really include in the piece was discussion around generational trauma in my family.
Okay.
My mother's parents arrived in the UK in 1936 from Austria and Germany, a
Mhm.
Jewish family. My mum was born in 1939, so she grew up in London with London kind of being bombed all around her,
Mm.
and there was, you know, there was a lot of trauma in terms of having to flee their home, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I really began to look at, and how did that impact my mother's upbringing and her personality, and, you know, all
Mm.
her style of parenting me, and all sorts of things like that, and how has that impacted who I am today. And, you know, it was such a huge topic that I didn't feel that I could bring it into the book, into my chapter in a short piece.
Yeah.
But and as far as the way that I explored it personally, and have had some conversations with my mum about this.
Oh, and I
um
love that. I love that you've had
yeah,
conversation. It's opened that up, right? It's opened up
yeah,
those
yeah,
conversations. I love that.
yeah. And actually the things that I did talk about in the book have also opened up conversations with my mum, because I asked my mum to look at my chapter before I sent it over to you,
Yeah.
because my mum works in publishing. She's an indexer and translator, so she works with books all the time, and so whenever I write anything that's important to me, she has a quick look at it. And so we had a lot of discussion around what I had written, and some of the things that I had written that she didn't know, or,
Yeah.
so it was a hugely cathartic exercise. And that idea of creating connection, which I
Mm.
talk about in my chapter, but in my chapter I talk about it in a more personal, individual sense,
Mhm.
whereas the connection that I was able to deepen with my mum
Mm.
through the writing of this chapter was really, really powerful.
Yeah. That's so gorgeous. And I find it interesting how themes of connection and disconnection are very strong through the book, through other chapters in the book as well. And I was having a conversation with a friend today that ultimately connection and disconnection is about love.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, you know, those are conversations about love, and yeah,
And
yeah.
that ability for energy to flow,
Mm,
and
yeah.
the blockages and the flow and the stopping and the starting, and again, absolutely linked to, absolutely all about love.
Yeah. Yeah. The flow of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Whether it's within you, or in
Yes.
relation to other, your connection with other people, it does actually all come down to love. And I think it's interesting that from what I've read of the other chapters of the book, there's a theme around family as well. Lots
Yeah.
of us are talking about family,
Mm-hmm.
and our experiences with family, and how that's impacted the legacy that we want to, or influenced the legacy that we want to create. So
Mm.
yeah, all comes down to love.
It all comes down to love and
It
family.
does.
And I mean, ultimately, when you talk about legacy, that's, of course, those things are going to come up, aren't they? Of course,
Mhm.
family is going to come up. Of course, well, maybe we don't automatically think about love, but maybe that's something that will get people thinking from this conversation.
Mhm.
So what would you say that legacy means to you? I ask this question a lot because this is the Legacy Life podcast. And so I often ask this question, what does legacy mean to you?
So I think legacy for me is about having an impact that is going to change the world for one person, or 1,000 people, or 1,000,000 people, or however many people it is.
Mm.
It's about having an impact that makes a positive change,
Mm-hmm.
and and that is ongoing from the moment that you have any of your own agency in the world. It's not necessarily something that we just leave behind us. It's, you know, it's something that we're creating and doing now.
And, you know, that really connects with your invitation to shine brightly, you know, that sense of that we all have something to offer. We all have this light within us that we can let out and shine, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, there's this wonderful Marianne Williamson quote about shining brightly, and you're probably familiar with it.
Yes,
and she talks about shining our light so that others are able to do the same. You know, and I think that's what's so beautiful about it. It's almost like I almost have this kind of image in my mind when I talk about this of one lamp lighting the other. You know, and this kind of this illumination spreading through us each inspiring the next person and the next person.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I don't know, I'm just wondering if I asked you that question. Have we talked about how you found the writing process?
No.
So how did you find the writing process?
The writing process itself was a little bit more challenging than I at first expected it to be. I kind of had this idea. I think what it was when I was, and I always, when I talk about this, I always come back to university. And I know it was almost 20 years ago that I was at university, but it's, you know, it was a really poignant time in my life where I was writing on a very consistent basis. And when you read my chapter, people who read my chapter will maybe see how that impacted me later on and at the time, and how this process that I was going through at the time created so there was like I had a very kind of structured way of creating my work. And I had a process that I went through where I would read what I needed to read, and then I would create bullet points, and then I would order the bullet points of what I wanted to say, and then I would create paragraphs around them. And, you know, I had a very kind of strict routine of how I created my work, and it was a formula that really worked well for me. And I did well at university, and I put, as you all know, I put quite a lot of pressure on myself to do well, and I did do well. But when I came to write this chapter, I kind of just assumed, I think, that I would slip back into being able to produce something at that level. And, you know, kind of forgetting how many years had passed in between. And also, you know, when I was writing essays at university, I was reading a wide range of books to bring all my knowledge together. And these are the points I want to make. And when I sat down to write this chapter, that's not, you know, it was coming from within me rather than from outside sources. And so I was a bit stuck. And we had wonderful support from the publishers, from Nicola Humber, who's just fantastic, and we had these wonderful writing sessions that we took part in together, and that was brilliant for me. A couple of tips that I had from Nicola about how to get started. And then I kind of went through a kind of similar process of notes and reordering and that sort of thing. And so the actual physical process of writing was a little harder, but the emotional process of writing the chapter was it was like going to therapy. It was, you know, I really feel like things that I hadn't acknowledged and hadn't given much time and thought to, I really went deeper with, and feel like I've explored in a much deeper way through the process of writing this chapter. My whole kind of mindset about the stuff that I talk about has completely changed.
Yeah.
So it's been hugely cathartic.
it's so interesting you sharing that, because it's been similar for me, writing and holding space for this book has really brought up who I am and what my purpose is and how I bring my gifts into the world, and all of that, all of those questions, and have been, and how I describe what I do, like, there's been a couple of iterations for me in terms of my purpose and how I would define that, and how I speak about that has all come through writing this book. So it's, and
I felt like the finished piece, like I feel very vulnerable sharing this piece of writing with the world as well. You know, it's deeply personal stuff, which I haven't shared in a public way before. You know, I hadn't even shared some of it with my mum before, or my best friends, you know. And you know, there's elements there was elements that I had to consider very carefully because of the potential impact for other people. You know, I wanted to make sure that I handled things sensitively and with respect, but also I needed to tell my story and be truthful. And so, you know, and then there was this a little bit of a conflict for me of, well, what should I share? What shouldn't I share? How should I share it? And then whilst I'm really happy with the piece that I ended up with and really proud of the work that I've done, there's definitely a sense of vulnerability and maybe a bit nervous about sharing this stuff with other people. So it's, and that's definitely come up again in the last couple of weeks since we've been like, okay, it's happening now.
Yes.
You know? It's like,
yeah. And as you're coming up to birth this thing into the world, right, that nervousness and that sense of vulnerability, and will anybody like it, want to read it, get anything from it, which I can assure you, having read your chapter, absolutely.
Thank you.
The whole book. It's been such a privilege for me to hold space for these stories to come through and create this platform, this book together, you know, for you to speak your truth. And I think when you're talking about a personal journey, when there's an autobiographical element to what you're writing, I mean, for all of us, it's all our personal stories. So that's naturally going to feel exposing. It's naturally, you know, we're naturally going to feel a bit vulnerable about sharing these things. And like you, I had a similar thing with my chapter, that there are elements in it that I've never shared with anybody before, and I'm actually sharing something in my chapter that had only ever been shared with me as well. So something from my mother that had only ever been shared with me, and I've checked it out with her, don't worry, I have spoken to her about it. But it is this sense of, and it felt important because, you know, for me, that was about breaking some cycles and taboos and breaking things that aren't spoken about, to shine a light, you know, that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And your chapter is, a lot of it's talking about allowing the light from you to shine out. And I suppose in this instance, I'm talking about shining a light on things that, you know, bringing things out of the darkness into the light, so that we can let go of the taboo or the shame or anything like that, you know, which is naturally going to be really exposing, you know, or feel really.
And this is it, I think. You know, there's an element for me of of nervousness about how it will be received,
Mhm.
more by people who know me than by
Yeah.
people who don't.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and that I've had to look at that a bit and be like, well, why,
Mm.
why is that? Why am I concerned about what other people think of my truth?
Yes.
And that's like,
And it's interesting the
okay.
conversations that come up, like you're talking about with your mother. So I had a conversation with my mom, and I had a conversation with my dad about this book and some of the things I've written in my chapter. And my mom was amazing. And she was like, I want you to speak your truth. And you shared your chapter with your mother, right? And I said to my mom, do you want to read it? And she said, no, I want to read it when it's published, because I don't want you to influence you in any way. I want you to speak your truth. And if I
Wow.
find any of that difficult, that's my stuff to deal with. Right.
Oh, wow. That is incredible.
Yeah. And so
What
I'm
a
like, okay,
beautiful
well, I'm free. I'm
experience.
free to then speak my truth. I'm free to then share. And, a conversation I was having with a friend this morning, one of the things he was saying was that, as parents, our parents have a lot of power over us. We love them. We seek their approval. And some people feel like they can't say things until their parents have passed, or they can't be the person they want to be because of the expectations on them. And if anybody's listening and they're in that position, reading this book, I feel, would support you, because it is different people's journeys with finding their truth, finding their purpose, and finding a path to living it, being it, sharing it,
Yeah. And I would just love to say that the group of people that have come together to create this book is just so incredibly beautiful and inspiring. Like, everybody's stories, with people from a wide range of backgrounds, and it feels like a really beautiful representation of humanity.
Yes.
And it's not one single type of person with a single type of story. It's just this beautiful range, and that feels very, very special to me.
Yeah, it's a really special alchemy in this book, isn't it? With those stories. Yeah. And for me, only last week I spoke to my dad as well, and he felt like the more difficult person to speak to about it. And he was like, don't worry, I'm not going to get upset. And he will feel what he feels, and that's fine when he reads it. But it was a relief for me for him to say, I'm not going to get upset. I don't know if he will or he won't, but in his way as well, going, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay for you to write what you want to write, be who you want to be, do what you need to
it's
do.
so beautiful that both your parents have been able to support you in such a way. That's just lovely.
So yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure anybody who's thinking about writing or thinking about sharing, because one of the things that comes up with my clients that I work with as well is this, like, we're doing it with writing, but that sense of doing Facebook Lives or doing a post or a blog or whatever it is you want to share with the world, like having the freedom to actually be authentically you, what you speak about, shine your light, shine brightly, is something people find really difficult, to do.
Yeah, I've got one point to make on that, which I think is, like, definitely relevant, because for years I have resisted journaling, absolutely resisted it for years and years. Despite loving reading, despite loving writing, I have resisted journaling because I felt as if it was giving me another thing I had to do.
Ah, yeah.
basically. This has
Mm-hmm.
been my resistance with journaling, is I didn't want another pressure of something I had to find time for. And, it just really, I just didn't feel aligned to it. I just felt like, oh no, it's just another thing. And, anyway, we submitted our chapters at around the end of July, I believe.
Yeah.
And in the middle of July, or on the part of the way through July, was like halfway through my birth year. And I decided that on my 39th and a half birthday, I would begin journaling. And
Ah.
I've been journaling every day since.
Oh, wow.
And I get up a little bit, well, almost every day. Let's not say every single day, but almost every day.
Regularly and consistently.
Regularly and pretty consistently. And my process for doing it has been to just get up a little bit earlier and do it first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the first thing I do is as soon as I get out of bed. And that has been the best way for me, because if I leave it till later in the day, it just doesn't get done. And so that's really worked for me. And I feel as if like this the floodgates have been opened with writing for me, like when I started writing for the process of writing this chapter, and now I'm writing about my thoughts and my feelings and my experiences and my ideas and my desires every single day. And I wasn't doing that before this experience. So I hadn't actually made that link until we started talking about it. But yeah.
Well, I love that it's inspired and sparked a new habit for you that is beneficial for you and your life. Journaling is such a helpful process for working through ideas, thoughts, emotions, all of it, processing life. And through the book, there are journaling prompts through the different chapters as well. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, this book sounds interesting, there are exercises and journal prompts that support you with your exploration of your life, your business, your legacy. So yeah,
and this is what I was thinking actually, where this point kind of came from, was when we were talking about how this book can support people in awakening their legacy. Is and you don't have to sit down and write a chapter in a book. You don't have to. That doesn't have to be the way that you, and also as well, you don't necessarily have to share with the world. It can just be something that's just for you for now, and maybe one day you'll want to share your story. But if this is something that you've never done before, and you've got, I noticed one of the reasons that I didn't journal for a long time was because I had lots of thoughts in my head, and I thought, well, I think a lot, I think all these things through, and sometimes I'd have a thought and I think, oh, I should write that down. And I kind of didn't. And now and then so if you're the kind of person that has lots of thoughts, and you feel like, oh god, like you have a thought and then it kind of links to something else, and you have a bit of a light bulb moment, and all those things, like even just write down a sentence and see where that takes you, because it may be the beginning of something.
Yes, it sounds like you've probably got a whole nother book there.
We shall see.
Yeah, I love that, because just write something that I've noticed. I'm not always great at reading my notes, but it's so interesting. I have been to a regular kind of women's circle, and when I've looked back at like a couple of months previously, or even at the beginning of the year, I had that idea months ago. It's like, it's so interesting when you look back that what actually comes out, but when it actually drops in and you take the action on it, might be months after you've originally written it down, so it's interesting. Yeah. Oh, I could just talk about this all day. It's so exciting, the stuff that gets awakened. But I feel it's time to finish here. And for anybody listening, do come and check out we've got a website, we've got a page, and of course there'll be the link that if you want to read this book, you can order it, you can read it and see what this awakens for you.
Amazing.
So thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.